Hello, so we are here for the second part of the Unpopular Opinions series, and I imagine this is going to be pretty informal like the last one. People will probably trickle in, but right now we have Catholic Wench, and say hello?
Hello.
And we have Frederick Bastiat. Is that your name?
Yes. Call me
Okay.
Volt here, by the way.
Voltaire. Okay. Excellent. So hopefully we will be able to get through opinions. I don't know. I don't have any opinions, unfortunately, on the war in Syria coming up, but that's certainly the most controversial thing about what's happened.
Yeah.
Probably need some caffeine too. I've been not getting very good sleep in the last few days, but that's one of the reasons why I decided I needed to have a little bit of a break to do a live stream. So, Voltaire, you have a YouTube channel?
Yes.
Okay. I think you were talking about that a little. I think weren't you on Prince Imperial's channel, right?
Yes. And the academics channel, like several times.
Oh man, I really need to get Academic Agent on these streams. The problem is that he's in Britain, so it's not exactly easy to get to make the time zones work out. He's probably asleep right now.
It's 11. It's 11 right now where I live.
Well, yeah, and it's probably like 4 a.m. in England, right?
Probably.
Anyway, so anyone have any orders of business before we get right on to the unpopular opinions? I really forgot how we did this last time, but
You had a list in front of you, I think.
no, I do. I still have the list.
Okay.
Right.
Well, why don't you shoot?
Well, okay. Well, I think we got to 25 last time. I'm reading the chat. I made the mistake. Just like the Pope, the distributist is a globalist sellout. Someone was arguing the other day that Catholicism was like the predominant globalist organization and that its entire existence was to destroy the nation state. I'm like, these critiques are very inconsistent. Suddenly, the Catholic Church was always accused of dividing Europe into nations from the Empire of Rome. That was one contiguous international body, and now we get into the 21st century, and suddenly we learn that, as opposed to not having internationalism enough, the Catholic Church doesn't have internationalism too much. So people need to get their story straight on this one.
No, I thought people say that about the Jews.
Who?
I thought people say that about the Jews.
Well, that's always been I think the criticism is a little bit more consistent, if not more conspiratorial, right? Like, but usually it's like the Catholic Church is regressive and nation focused and provincial, and now it's the Catholic Church is internationalist. Not so sure that really makes a lot of sense. Thoughts on resurrecting the African right? I don't know what that is. So I don't know. It doesn't look like the chat has much to say. So,
did you know the Catholic Church? I think I'm just pulling a number out of my head here, but 30 rites, 40 different rites of how you can say Mass, really depending on the culture of the place. So yeah, there is an African rite. There's many, many, many different rites of how you can say Mass. So
well, that's great, right? But it's not. You don't know if you really need to say the Mass in Swahili. I mean, that's not.
Well, yeah, you're supposed to say it in the vernacular. I guess saying it in Swahili in the middle of, I don't know, Dublin or something may not work. But
well, it's kind of funny. Did you hear the whole thing with that senator that accused Mark Zuckerberg of writing the terms of service for Facebook in Swahili, and then he got called out for using a microaggression because he referenced an African language as being uniquely indecipherable. But anyway, I'm sorry. Maybe I should just get to the meat of the matter. Okay. Well, the chats can introduce anything that they want to as a subject of conversation. In the meantime, I'll see if I can't get to the if I can figure out where I put it. Okay. Unpopular opinions. I think we were at 25 last time.
I wasn't keeping count, but sure, we were at 25.
some of these things are, I might go back on this because I don't feel like we have any of the people we need to make these work. How about this? The idea that sexuality is part of an immutable true essence of a person should be transparently false for anyone who's ever used internet pornography.
It sounds like you've been reading Evola for some reason.
Pardon me?
You sound
Evola?
like you Eleva, you know.
Julius Evola? What does it have
Yeah.
to do with sexuality? I've never heard anything like
Like,
that.
I mean, like he has some interesting say about sexuality, even though he's a pagan.
What does he say?
Since he's a self-described super fascist, he kind of
I know that, but what does he say about sexuality?
let's see, metaphysics of sex. He said that that it should be like something like it should be like above, like it should be like sex should be like not just a physical degraded thing, but more of a natural condition of love.
Well,
Like
it
it
sounds
should
almost like a Catholic thing, the way you're saying it, right?
like it should be like more of a it should be like more of a natural extension of human love, I think, than just something that is just degrading and kind of boring.
I think that might have to fall under. I think saying that sex should be attached to love probably was the least radical thing Julius Evola ever said, as far as I'm concerned.
I have a question to pose. Explain. Obviously, I believe that sex should be, done with love. But how does sex become degrading without love, rather than just neutral?
Well,
that's a pretty basic question, Catholic wench. I mean, I don't know. I think that sex is supposed to be linked to love. Otherwise, it's degrading.
Well, that's what I mean.
You want a diagram about exactly how the process is accomplished. we're gonna do. I think what Catholic wench wants is she wants like a Virgin Chad meme with like sex with love. It's the sex without commitment virgin versus the sex with love Chad.
I'm gonna kill you. No. I mean, like, I can make a piece of toast for somebody without love, but it's not a degrading act. Am I not giving of myself in a particular way?
You're talking about like theology of the body or whatever. Like you're talking about like the idea of like total self-giving.
Sure. Yeah. So if you're doing something that is not totally self-giving, then it's going to be automatically degrading to your dignity, rather than the opposite. Am I making any sense?
No, you're making sense.
Okay.
I think that while I was sort of targeting this comment a little bit more at people like Dan Savage and other people who are big on the sexual revolution, like the people who are of the opinion like you have this identity, and the identity is you're gay or you're a lesbian or you're straight, right? Like, or you're cisgender. Like, I don't associate the idea of heterosexuality to me is ridiculous and made up, and so is the idea of homosexuality or any sexuality that isn't fluid.
Yeah, just the sexual revolution was a mistake.
Yeah. But moreover, I think what happened was that it sort of colonized the language we use to talk about these things, such that we talk. We talk about sexuality like it's an inherent piece of our identity. This is the problem, right? Like, I am like this whole thing. Like, you have to deal with my sexuality because I am a lesbian, because I am gay, because I am cisgender, because I am whatever, right? But I think that's just, it fundamentally isn't the case, right? People's sexuality shifts over time. Hello?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't have a strong opinion on sex, honestly.
Oh man, this live stream's off to a bit of a rickety start.
Oh no, I muted myself. Sorry. Basically, you have a sexuality, but you are not your sexuality. That's what you're saying, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, I'd say you do a sexuality. Sexuality is something you do. It's performative, to borrow a progressive term, right? I think that the conservative side needs to reclaim the word performative and start using it with things like gender and sexuality, right? If you say that sexuality is something you do and not something you are, then I think we're getting much closer to the truth. And the same thing is true with whatever gender is, even though I really don't like the concept of gender.
Really? Why not?
Well, because the idea of gender is that there is this abstract gender that you are, like that's not your sex, that's different from your sex. That's sort of implicitly something that you are and don't choose for yourself.
Okay, this is such an awkward conversation.
Okay, well, apparently this is not the right audience for this conversation.
Maybe, yeah, ContraPoints.
Waited for more people to actually come on. Well, ContraPoints would be a good person to engage with this if they weren't.
Fritz is around. You can let him on.
No, I did. I sent him the link.
Okay, cool.
He can get on whenever he wants to.
Hello.
Oh, hey, how's it going?
Good. How are you guys doing?
Good. We're just getting down the unpopular opinions list. I know we're on.
When I turned it on, you started talking about sex, so I had to come on.
Well, we were just talking about some of these things aren't really unpopular from the perspective of people who are sort of already in line with reactionary ideas. Mm-hmm. And one of them was that the idea that we have this the idea that we have a fixed sexuality is kind of ridiculous. And it is not even in line with progressive theory, for that matter, right?
Mm-hmm. I mean, in a way, it's like obviously the term itself has been poisoned, but you could almost say sodomite or sodomy is actually a more accurate term because it described an action rather than like this inherent, like abstract, like identity.
Yeah, I mean that's sort of the triumph of the therapeutic in the 19th century. We described a word called homosexuality, right? Like you didn't engage in sodomy, you were a homosexual, right? Mm-hmm. And this is sort of in keeping with the 19th century prerogative to take all things that were virtue and action focused and turn them into categories of being, right? So racial science was the order of the day, eugenics was the order of the day, and because of that, sexual deviancy wasn't something you did, it was something that you had or were, and mm-hmm. and that's sort of that was sort of probably one of the origins of this. At any rate, we kind of beat this one to death, so maybe I'll go on to the next one. I'm trying to figure out what's properly considered will be properly. Well, I mean, here's one where I've talked about a lot, and again, this is probably like a hot take if Buckley were on. Maybe he will come on right now. I did send Ghost of Buckley a link to the live stream, this next unpopular opinion is conservatives will continue to lose as long as they persist in trying to pay people who hate them not to tear mm-hmm. down the comforting symbols of a society that died more than 3 decades ago.
Oh, sound like what's his name? And something. Although
something.
Endeavor and.
Well, yeah. This is a reactionary. This is sort of a reactionary talking point.
Yeah, like that's sort of the thing. The boomer conservatism, PragerU, that kind of thing.
Yeah, PragerU. Yeah, I mean here, maybe to make it more relevant to what's going on in the news today, I would say that an ultimate symbol, and this is going to immediately make it controversial, an ultimate symbol of a society that died more than 3 decades ago is Israel. Israel is nationalism by proxy. We can't be nationalistic towards the West and Western culture So we have to like take this other country that is kind of sort of allied with the West and be nationalistic on their behalf. And so we can kind of pursue our nationalistic urges through a third order party.
Vicariously.
Vicariously, yeah, sure.
So
I'm always amazed at how much boomer conservatives just go to the wall for Israel in ways that they wouldn't go to the wall for their own country.
Mm-hmm.
It's really important for Israel to maintain itself as a Jewish state. Is it really important for any European country to maintain itself in the ethnic form that it currently exists? Is it important for any North American Western country to maintain its ethnic composition? But for some reason, it's really important for these boomer conservatives that Israel maintain its identity as a Jewish state.
And right? I would add, at the expense, it seems often, of Middle Eastern Christians.
Yeah, there was that really bizarre interaction between Ted Cruz and
when you said if you're not with Israel, you're not with America or something.
If you're not with Israel, you're not with me or something like that. And he got booed by a bunch of Arab Christians. And then it was really quite a bizarre circumstance. And then one we would have a hard time imagining happening in another age.
And when Trump announced the moving the embassy to Jerusalem, like, the Christians in Bethlehem said, we're not going to open, ourselves up for Pence to visit here. Like, he's no longer welcome here. And then, of course, recently, a few days ago, the leaders of like the Syrian Orthodox, Oriental, and Melkite Catholic churches released a statement condemning the airstrike on Syria.
Yeah, I would imagine. I mean, well, I don't know. I mean, I guess we're kind of getting into this whole recent war in Syria thing, which, I mean, it seems like people have a lot of opinions about. Maybe we could just open it up for grievances on that regard. But
Zionism, the Zionist lobby is pretty strong in America. Pretty strong.
We have the world's largest population of Jews outside of Israel.
Well, sure. But that's not why it's strong. It's strong because a lot of non-Jewish people go to think Israel is like a number one priority for them.
I mean,
I've never understood.
Even now, as an ex-evangelical, like, I still would warn, like, okay, Israel existing as a country, okay, whatever, but like, just the endless evangelicals screaming, you have to support Israel no matter what, makes it's sort of terrifying to an extent that, or not terrifying, it's just, I find it a bit disturbing.
Well, it's a bit irritating, I guess. It's tiresome, right?
I mean, imagine Netanyahu.
The psychology, I suppose. I mean, given the state that the world is in currently, right?
Like, even Ben Shapiro called someone like Ron Paul like an anti-Semite because he expressed anti-Zionist view in one of his books. I just find that to be ridiculous.
Well, yeah. I mean, this has kind of been the MO, is that I think that a lot of Jewish supporters of Israel understand that if they make everyone who criticizes Israel an anti-Semite, they're going to quickly wear down the word anti-Semite. But you will get every now and again a few people acutely using that word to try to blast the enemies of Israel.
Most of the critics of the airstrike are anti-Semitic, sexist, and racist.
Wow, I am.
Yeah, that was a headline.
Then
what was the headline? Where?
I think it was like on CNN or Fox News.
Probably Fox News.
Yeah.
I mean, that sounds like a Fox News headline.
I don't support launching missiles at Syria. Therefore, I hate women.
Well, they said it was sexist on Fox News. That sounds a little bit weird.
Then I can't remember which one it was on, but in any case, the point is just, yeah, I know an example of what you're talking about. I mean, for me, I'm almost tempted to just make a rant, like a 5-minute rant about the state of certain modern media conservatives that are supposed to be like the voice of changing the conservative movement to something useful, like Steven Crowder or Ben Shapiro. That's like I'm just getting really sick of every single Steven Crowder video / tweet is, lol, look, leftists are hypocrites, or I'm going to lose debates against college students on gun control.
That is kind of ridiculous with the Crowder, just how easily he loses debates. He's a terrible debater.
He is. I mean, it was almost embarrassing. Ghazi Kodzo, aka Black Hitler, apparently, like, he was on a debate with Gavin McInnes and Anthony Cumia, and he won. He managed to make Gavin McInnes. Gavin McInnes managed to make Ghazi Kodzo look actually intelligent and have rational views.
So, wow, look like accepting leftist premises not going to get anywhere for the right.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think it's all summed up, and there's a little political cartoon I saw where it's Republican elephant now on a podium saying the Democrats are the real racists, and then it shows like 30 years from now, like a tattooed up like Dysus scum on his on Zier's shoulder with like weird problem glasses, elephant going, the neo-Leninists are the real transphobes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's, I guess, well, with this particular thing, I think we're kind of leaving Catholic wench out of this conversation. I apologize. I always wondered, sort of normie conservatives and boomer conservatives they so easily discard sort of useful examples for their own causes. If they wanted to have more nationalism, instead of complaining about European style socialism and supporting Israel with money, why don't they just demand Israeli style foreign policy and Israeli style immigration policy while secretly giving money to European nationalists? I mean, that would be a much healthier relationship, in my opinion. And if you couch things in terms of European style immigration policy, I think it would illustrate how unradical a lot of these propositions are to begin with.
Because again, it really wouldn't be difficult to convince a lot of boomer conservatives or normie conservatives. Like, if you ask them, would you support a strict, much stricter limit on immigration? Well, most of them would say yes. But it's weird that they don't seem to ever really enforce these policies. I mean, how many bricks have been laid on the wall? Or sorry, I'm getting off topic, but I think I know what you mean.
No, sorry. Wait, Catholic wench, do you have you're like the pro-Israel person in this chat though, right? Not to throw you to the wolves, but I mean.
Well, you've thrown me to the wolves for being Canadian. Now you can do it for being pro-Israel. Anyway, from what I've been taught, or my understanding is that the Muslims simply hate the Jews and want them exterminated, and they just want Israel wiped off the map because they simply hate Jews.
Well, that's certainly true. That's certainly true.
Yeah,
but
so
don't they just hate everybody?
That's not the whole story. I mean, Muslims hate the Jews and want to wipe them off the map, but Israel is really good at wiping Muslims off the map. They're exceedingly good at wiping Muslims off the map.
Peaceful Muslims off the map? I mean, when I was in Israel...
I feel like, sometimes peaceful, sometimes not so peaceful. I mean, it's hard to tell, right?
Mm-hmm. But it did say something to me when I was in Israel, when I saw Jewish people, Muslim people, and Christian people all living together in moderately clean, safe, like I felt safe there. And as soon as I went into the Palestinian area, it was very run down. People were throwing rocks at the tourist buses, and groups of boys followed me around and were slapping me and everything. Like, it was a night and day between Israel and Palestine, right?
And that's an excellent point, right? That's an excellent point, because if you're kind of doing the Mencius Moldbug test, and the test for a good society is order and not some totally abstract notion of freedom or equality or something like that, then Israel is by far the more ordered society and the more civilizational society. I think that in some sense, it's impossible for me to criticize Israel as a reactionary, because in some ways, Israel is one of the most reactionary societies of all time. I just think that it's a shame that the people who support Israel so mindlessly in this country seem to think that they can only support it by dishing out money and not by actually learning Israelis' understanding of the universe, which I think is much less self-deceiving than the current neoconservative perspective on the universe, the John Bolton perspective on the universe.
Hey, they're Jewish. What can you do about them?
Pardon? Oh yeah, I mean that obviously, I mean that complicates things among the reactionary crowd too, right?
Mhm.
Just like it's not good. It's not cool to be an anti-Semite, but there's something funny about those jokes of making fun of the Jews so much.
Well, partially, I imagine anti-Semitic jokes are because they're supposed to be verboten.
I mean, anti-Semitic jokes will get your channel taken down immediately on YouTube, right?
Yeah, that's why I'm sort of miffed that
couldn't-
my podcast keeps having people talk about the Jews.
No, I'm sorry.
If you say the wrong thing about that particular demographic, they will take down your YouTube and Twitter account. Which is why people like straddling the line with memes and stuff like that, right? It's sort of the Barbara Streisand effect.
We cannot take anything ill about the Jewish people. Nothing bad about them. Nothing.
Not actually. I'm dead serious on this. In a lot of ways, you can't.
Okay. I like to say I respect the Jewish people. They have a strong right, self-determination in Israel. I'm a proud Zionist American, and I have a lot of Jewish friends, and therefore I'm not anti-Semitic.
Okay, well, it's kind of funny because even in these groups, I mean, the ADL is one of the main people policing Twitter and YouTube, but also sort of groups similar to the ADL are the people who are writing up speech codes in Europe, which is why the test cases usually are anti-Semitic ones. There's a reason that Count Dankula might be getting sent to prison for teaching his pug to do a Sig Heil,
Of course, there is one demographic in Europe that these speech codes do not apply to, of course.
Any native.
No, I meant Muslims. They're not going to be punished for any of this. They can say whatever they want about the Jews. They're never getting punished for it.
Well, yeah, this is another thing maybe. I wouldn't be surprised if the system picks out one or two examples to demonstrate that it's a universal principle. But you're right. Generally, the Muslim populations are probably not going to get this as consistently enforced. If I were to guess about this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Any other thoughts? Sorry, but we should just move on.
I don't want your channel taken down or anything.
Well, it was sort of a joke, but I mean, you can't. The reason why people meme this stuff is because they know how people crack down on this so much. So, and it's also why people are bitter about it, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, unpopular opinions. If social conservatives had sold chastity to people the way that left sold veganism, our society would look radically different.
So as in sort of this moral imperative of like almost like if you don't do this, the whole planet will die, or with the same amount of fervor and propaganda that the veganists or that the vegans use it.
Well, veganism is seen, so chastity is seen as a personal failing in a modern society, especially if you're a man. Males pursuing intentional chastity are oftentimes insinuated to be incels, but if you were to abstain from eating meat, which is another self-denial, it's seen as a remarkable personal control, regardless of whether it's healthy or not.
Well, I think so. I think a lot of people, they view losing your virginity as what makes you a man, because there really isn't anything else that really makes you a man in our society. I think that there's a big jump between being a boy and being a man, at least in a man's head. And if we don't have that, like losing of the virginity, you need to replace it with some other event that makes you a man, if that makes sense.
For black men, I honestly do not know. Honestly.
Pardon me?
For black people, I don't know, because black people tend to have sex at a relatively young age.
Well, I think it's more or less just an extension of how culture is going generally. Usually these things are usually these things are more pronounced in the African American community, but the African American community isn't so much going in a different direction as it is just catching the leading edge of modern patterns.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
So I mean, speaking of, well, anyway, any thoughts on this one?
I think maybe the problem is that we more or less agree with a lot of these things. Most of it's as you said, a lot of these.
That's obviously a problem. I should get some leftists on. I always invite them and they never show up, right?
Someone should pretend to be a leftist.
ContraPoints might join.
ContraPoints will never join a live stream of mine. I can email her I can email
him
that individual. I can email that individual the link, but I invited Bronx blogger on. I could see if anyone else is up. I don't know. I mean, I can keep on going.
Maybe there's one that might be controversial for us.
What?
Maybe there's one that might be controversial for us.
Ooh, maybe Ray would be interested in coming on, right?
Yeah, Ray. Remember Sami?
Well, I'll send her an invite just to see if. See, I've been so out of the loop. The only thing I've been paying attention to in the news has been more or less this
Syria business.
The Syria business and the whole Mark Zuckerberg hearings, I suppose.
When he looks even less human than he already did.
He's like the most awkward man I ever seen on the earth.
Because he's a robot or an alien.
He looks that way. He speaks. Actually, people should give him some credit. He does speak a little bit more like an executive, especially than he used to, right? He still looks autistic.
He still looks like a model from Oblivion. like one of the character models from the Oblivion game.
He just looked like an average Jewish person to me.
I don't know, really? Does he look that? He doesn't look that Jewish.
But come on, if you have a name like Zuckerberg, you definitely know you have
his name certainly sounds Jewish, but that's...
ADL should be up here any moment.
For some reason, we're not getting off of Jewish topics in this live stream, which is highly dangerous for this channel.
Yeah, I would suggest a change.
It's also just boring. Like, endless. I don't know how the alt-right does it. Just endlessly talking about the Jews. It must get boring after a while.
Yeah, I mean, conspiracy theories are constantly fascinating for the people who are involved in them, right? It doesn't matter that it doesn't generate any new ideas. But hey, hopefully we get some people who might disagree with some of these things coming on. I should have made a little bit more sure that we would have had more disagreements. Ooh, we got a super chat.
You got 2 super chats.
I got super. Oh, okay.
Super chats.
Okay, LM says, "Love it when Dist masturbates to his own brain." I guess that's what the opinion.
He does not do that.
Okay. And then Pragmatic Culture says, "The Protestant Reformation for $9.99. Thank you very much for an appropriate super chat." He says, "The Protestant Reformation and its consequences have been a disaster for the European race." Well, I mean,
unfortunately, I'm no longer able to contest that. So,
no, you could.
Do you think the Reformation was sort of a hotbed for the moral relativism?
Well, a lot of people have speculated this. The thing is that the Protestant Reformation did not immediately kick off moral relativism. It immediately kicked off a huge number of religious sects that were very, very moral absolutists and even puritanical.
I think it broke the confidence of Christendom in itself. I think that was the biggest thing that it
destroyed the idea. I think I would say this. I might argue this just sort of as a thought that, and I've made a video about this, that I think that when I looked at the history of the Holy Roman Empire of Germany immediately post the Reformation and pre the 30 Years' War, they actually did have a very prolonged, extended period of peace following the Peace of Augsburg. And it seemed that possibly for a time you could have kept the idea of at least the empire together with having Lutheran and Catholic subjects. But the thing is, it eventually started breaking down as tensions rose, and of course the pesky Calvinists also wanted a piece of the religious toleration pie.
That's more towards the point of the political order. I think what pragmatic culture was talking about was the cultural order.
Yeah,
and I think that you could argue that there was a unified political order of Renaissance Europe that could have taken root that was destroyed by the Reformation. But as for any kind of destructive cultural element, I think that it's hard to argue that the Reformation did that. And if you were going to argue that it accomplished that ultimately, you'd have to argue that it was like a seed put into the mind of European culture.
Because again, the ideas of moral relativism didn't really even come up until the late 19th century. A good 300 years after the Reformation.
So when the death of God happened in Europe. So.
Yeah, well, the prediction of the death of God.
Well, I mean, and the thing is, if you're talking about the lack of confidence in the West, that we kind of have a very good historical event that ushers that in, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's not the Reformation; it's World War One, right?
Mm-hmm. I mean, in a way, maybe the 30 Years' War that really, I would argue that definitively ended the idea of a Christendom. Even more so than the Reformation.
Well, it killed off Christendom for the sake of the rise of the nation state, but I would argue that it's still Western culture.
Which, ironically, the country that emerged out of the 30 Years' War as sort of the the proto-nation state was a Catholic nation, France.
It wasn't a nation state at that point of time.
I would say under Louis XIV, it transformed into one.
No,
certainly
I would
more
argue
so
that it didn't become a nation state till the French Revolution.
I mean, in what way? Why?
Why? Because there wasn't a French people. There were a Parisian people. There were a people in the Occitan. There were the Gascon. Only 20% of the population spoke French at the time.
The problem, though, being is the fact I'm thinking. I guess we have two different understandings of nation states, and again, I said proto-nation state in the sense that you have a large, relatively speaking, large national government centralized enough that has centralization over tax policy, over the military, over government, that's able to rein in any of the local estates to the point where there is a French nation as opposed to a French kingdom that's composed of very independent feudal lords. And
I would argue that was a French kingdom. It was a centralized French kingdom.
Yes.
As opposed to a feudal one. So that's what happened. So it was more the centralization of the state and the rise of the state. But I would argue that it wasn't really truly a nation. It was still more of an empire of a variety of different nations, all collected within kind of a state apparatus.
I mean, I would concede that, considering the fact that you didn't really have yet the increased consciousness of the people, political consciousness of the average citizen. I guess we just sort of had different ideas, and I would agree with you that in terms of like concepts of nationalism, that did come around in the late 18th century, not the 17th. But I would still argue that the proto-modern bureaucratic centralized states did arise after the 30 Years' War.
Yes, I completely agree with you. It was kind of like the dislodging of religion from society and the rise of the state to supplant it.
And in a way, I would argue almost you could sort of see it like the fact that the 30 Years' War wasn't a strictly religious conflict sort of did that. The fact that the idea of like Spain and Austria being fanatically loyal to the church, you would expect France would have been as well, but the fact that they weren't, that they ended up siding with more or less the Protestant cause.
Okay, so we're getting a little bit far.
I was working out.
I was going to shut this down. Leo the Great says, "What do you think of Molinism?" What's Molinism?
Named after 16th century Spanish Jesuit theologian Luis de Molina as a philosophical doctrine which attempts to reconcile the providence of God with human free will.
So it's an answer to Calvinism?
So apparently William Lane Craig and Alvin Plantinga are prominent contemporary advocates of it.
Is that the middle knowledge position?
Yeah.
I think it tries to posit some sort of middle knowledge that tries to reconcile God's omniscience with human free will, something to that effect. But I don't know, I haven't really thought about it. So
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a
No,
tough
no
question.
opinion.
All of these very specific. I mean, if Alvin Plantinga and William Lane Craig are both Molinists, then contemporary apologetics is dominated by this view. As far as
And it largely is. That doesn't seem out of line from what I remember reading about modern apologists.
well, yeah, this is the thing, right?
I mean,
There's not
outside
like
of
a
maybe
huge
Dr.
funding
Tom
mechanism
White.
Pardon me.
I mean, maybe outside of Dr. Tom White, who is still a hardline Reformed Calvinist.
I mean, this is the thing with apologetics is that, despite the fact that I'm told that these fields are kind of fruitful in terms of new thoughts, and I think there's some clever stuff coming out of Alvin Plantinga, in particular, that I'm thinking of. It's just nowhere on the academic landscape of the modern university. Like every university will have a massive cultural studies department, but no one will do any theology. And furthermore, you won't be able to see that on campus. So, I'm sure Bell, regardless if we're in a golden age of apologetics and theology, it's just a fact that bell hooks rules this age and not anyone related to people like Reinhold Niebler or people advocating Molinism or anything else. It's just not the questions people are asking these days, unfortunately.
And I think that was the problem, right? It's people are too many. As much as I think William Lane Craig did a lot of great apologetics and still does, his arguments are too many steps away from where most modern people are, in the sense of they're not asking. It's like, before you can convince, I don't think you can convince somebody that God or Christianity is true if they already don't even believe that like life has any objective meaning.
So I got another super chat here, and I almost missed it. LM for $2, and he says, "Love how America went to shit when the Caths came." I think he thinks I'm going to disagree with this, but I kind of don't actually. I remember when Nick Fuentes and ContraPoints were on Lauren Southern's channel debating immigration, and Nick Fuentes made this case that the Catholic immigrants of the late 19th century were just totally the same as the Northern Europeans that had previously made America. Not
No.
really. Yeah, it's the Catholic influx of the late 19th century absolutely changed America culturally in a big way. And they undermined a lot of the high trust principles that would have otherwise led to an America that would have looked very, very different. Now, I'm Catholic, but I have to acknowledge that at some level, I'm not 100% represented in the American project. I can, at most, be an ally to what fundamentally is a Protestant cultural creation. Because this country is Protestant.
Yeah, and I would agree fully. The fact that, again, historically, Catholics have always been sort of on the outside of, and this is taking lines from Bishop Barron, that Catholics have always seemed to have been on the outside of mainstream American culture. Even, if you could argue at their high point in the early 1960s, when you have Fulton Sheen and, Graham Greene and, what's her name? The author? Flannery O'Connor. It seemed as soon as Catholics were finally accepted into mainstream American culture post World War II, the secular age took over, and instead of a Protestant country keeping the Catholics out, it's now a secular country keeping them out.
I mean, that was always the thing, right? With Catholics and Jews being sort of the two groups that were not entirely integratable into the American project. And I'm sort of a Milo Yiannopoulos on this person. I kind of think that Catholicism needed to be its own separate thing. I think that it kind of, in some ways, it did kind of ruin America and ruin American Catholicism for Catholicism to be as mainstream as it was. I don't see what the big deal is. And I think America is set up to have regional dominance of Catholics in certain states, and then a larger superstructure that was explicitly Protestant and explicitly Northern European. And I think that is the way that America just essentially has to deal with minorities. I mean, it doesn't have to be as brutal as America has dealt with African minorities
Hey, I turned out pretty well. I'm pretty happy that they enslaved African Americans that brought them here to America. Actually,
well, I mean, enslaved African Americans created a unique African culture in America, right? If you were to take African American culture, it's more culturally, it's one of the most culturally productive cultures worldwide, right? Despite the fact that it's poorer than white culture, it's the most productive. It's one of the most productive musical cultures and one of the most productive artistic cultures the world's ever seen.
No, I think it's like we get our. I think it's like we're confused. I think it's like we're just immediately going to rap music, but hey, jazz,
Well, I actually don't dislike rap. I know I'm like
What?
I know I'm a what? Did Catholic Wench?
Yeah,
Say it isn't so.
Hey, the form of rap is just poetry with a beat, right?
yeah, he's right about that.
It's not implicitly bad. It's used for like a lot of shit, right? These days, but like the idea of lyric poetry is what rap is at its inception.
Just too bad there's just a lot of communists in the Black community.
Yeah, they're not living down Dubois, right? And the other people, Booker T.
Washington, then
WBD Dubois. Is it Dubois? Is that how? Did you pronounce it like the French?
Yes, it's Dubois.
Dubois. Okay.
It's not Dubois, it's Du Bois.
Du Bois. Well, I've heard that too, but that's sort of like the Anglicanization of it, right?
Like by his own admission, he prefers Du Bois, but I like Dubois because he seemed like a Frenchman, a Black Frenchman, kind of.
Well, that's the tradition he was sort of operating in, and I think that's what like people like Ta-Nehisi Coates are trying to channel. If Ta-Nehisi Coates was as like talented as Dubois, which he's not. I actually, that's one of my unpopular opinions that I might get to a little bit later about rap. So I'm gonna save that. Oh, maybe we should just do it now, right? That is one of the unpopular opinions. We can skip ahead, right? I said that rap is in some ways more traditionalist than rock and roll, right? And I maintain that.
Wow,
I think it's true. I think the message of a lot of rap music, not so much.
Yeah.
It's a lot closer to R&B and older versions of that specific kind of music than rock and roll is. Rock and roll is.
This is always the big problem,
new.
right? Because if rap were a white phenomenon and not an African American phenomenon, like I could inside that community subject it to a lot of criticism that might help improve it. Like, for instance, people oftentimes make a lot of issue about rap being incredibly violent, and it is. But then, like, when progressives defend it, they're like, well, what about murder ballads in European culture? Well, yeah, murder ballads in European culture, but murder ballads in European culture were highly regulated to ensure that there was a moralistic dimension to all of them. Because they understood if they let these murder ballads just go off on their own direction and develop into separate gangster cultures, there'd be a serious problem with the genre. You can't develop like these pirate gospels, right? These criminal artistic categories that essentially idolize the criminal as sort of a new moral system. Mm-hmm. And so this is always obviously the problem, right? The problem is that and this is with Catholics too, right? It's, you see something inside a different culture than yours, and you don't know whether they have got their own rules for dealing with this, and your imposition of your own rules is going to be out of place, or whether this is actually a pathological element of their culture. Like, you can't make that call for another culture you don't belong in. And in a lot of ways, as a Catholic, or I should say perhaps as a Central or Southern European looking at Northern European culture, it's hard for me at all times to go like, okay, well, this is just Northern European culture cannibalizing itself, right? When do you know this piece of culture is something that they've adapted to do well? And to what extent do you see this as something that is an actual pathology, I guess? That got way too abstract, guys. Sorry.
Yeah, I don't have anything to say to that.
Yeah.
I've got some super chats. What do you think of Neo-reaction and Molbug's writings? I'll just put this to the chat. Or to the panel here.
I mean, generally, I have a positive
Give me a second.
both of those things.
To be
Yeah.
honest, I haven't read them yet.
I just sort of just view them as a revolt against the modern world, that kind of thing. Man, most spoilers and laughs.
I'm not a fan of neo-cameralism. That's what I'll say.
That's well, yeah.
But I think they're interesting, and I think he kind of puts into word, like mentions Molbug, at least he puts into words a lot of the things that I've already been thinking about.
I mean, he's the king of digressions, that's for sure.
Yeah, but he's really good at sort of, I guess, describing the problem, even if his solutions are a little nuts. Kind of like Evola in that way.
Yeah. I mean, Evola was much more the poet, I think. And for that matter, so was, if you're talking about NRX, so was Jonathan Bowden, right? I think the death of Bowden is something that NRX has never really recovered for.
No. Just be happy, distributist, that you are a man among the ruin. Just be happy because of that,
Well, I think I need to develop a way to become more positive about how I relate to my modern environment. I think this is obviously a psychological flaw, but it's sometimes hard for me, especially living in Seattle, not to just sort of react really negatively to my surroundings.
Like
it's the Catholic one you're missing.
What you got to do, Dave, to get happier is you got to listen to a lot of reggae.
Anytime I listen to reggae, I sort of immediately want to throw up.
Oh god!
Come on, it's not that bad.
Yeah, I've got a sort of a Caribbean. I'm a Gulf Coast kid, so I'm sort of a fan of the Caribbean and all that. So I don't.
Here's the thing about rap and reggae: it's all comes from blues, right? And blues is the fundamental American musical genre. It's the progenitor that leads to all musical genres that are North American in the present world.
Love blues too. That's not going to cheer you up, Dave.
Well, blues isn't going to cheer you up.
Yeah, we're gonna see a suicide note if you start listening to too much blues.
Blues is less depressing than its name implies.
It's not that depressing, but it's not going to cheer you up. It's just it sounds good.
Really?
Well, I mean,
maybe I play the blues. So
Yeah, I've never liked it for that.
What were you going to say, Doc?
Oh, I actually play the blues, so it makes me happy. I like it.
No,
I mean, playing any music makes you happy.
Yeah.
Unless you suck at it.
Blues is the great North American musical form. Right. Blues is where we get jazz. Blues is where we get rock and roll. Blues is where we get rap.
Country.
It's where we get, well, yeah, to a certain extent, blues mixing with like Irish and Scottish.
Yeah, country music in some parts sort of predates because it's a country is sort of a mix of the blues and then European folk music.
Mm.
It's not just the Celtic stuff. There's also some German, basically, just European folk music in general.
Most of it's English ballads that comes from
most of it is
Scottish
English
and Irish stuff mixed in. But anything that makes it sound distinctly American is influenced by bluesy type notions. And it's certainly where we get modern country music. Otherwise, you get sort of like stuff that sounds a little bit like Sacred Heart or Robert Burns. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, right? I think it's great. But sorry, I'm doing the folk music geek out, so I'm going to go read more super chats. Who is your patron saint other than Theotokos?
Theotokos.
Mother of God.
Oh, okay. Other than like my confirmation saint, or is this like
No,
the
I think
patron
that's
saint of this
the one
live stream?
he's asking about.
Yeah. What's your confirmation saint?
Oh, Paul. Catholic wench?
Joan of Arc.
Mine is going to be either Thomas More or St. John Fisher. Probably St. John
Interesting.
Fisher. I mean, I have a lot of connections with him, so I find a real strong emotional and spiritual connection when I look at their martyrdom.
Yeah, I'm Saint Albert the Great.
That's a good one.
Yeah,
I'm Saint Anthony of Padua.
that's a good one.
Interesting. Yeah. I don't know why I picked Paul, but it's a complicated story that I'm not necessarily getting into. But thank you very much, Lee the Great, for the super chat. A lot of super chats tonight. So, LM says, Dist, what are your thoughts on Mexican Catholicism? Well, you can't really answer that without talking about Mexican culture in general. And I kind of feel similar, even though I'm not Mexican, I feel like there's a similar thing going on, right? I feel that Mexico is in once two different cultures. There's sort of a highly conquistador-influenced ranchero culture that is, in many ways, very, very syncretic with cultures already existing in Southern California and Mexico. And then there is sort of a Catholic syncretic Aztec culture that exists more in the South and the indigenous areas in Mexico, which is much, much harder to integrate into our culture. And I think Mexico has the problem where they're ostensibly one people, but they're kind of not. They're kind of two different cultures living in the same area, the two cultures I just mentioned. And I think that this oftentimes gets us to like a very schizophrenic way about talking about Mexican culture, where you get like white, Hispanic, and you know, all these categories that seem to make no sense. And it's hard to come up with an idea of like were Hispanics oppressed or not, and you know. So I don't know. I don't know if there is Mexican Catholicism. I think there are a variety of Catholicisms in Mexico that are very different from each other.
I've heard some interesting theories, or I've heard some interesting theories about Mexico in general. I think generally they have a big problem with secularism.
Oh yeah,
for a while, but beyond that, you know. And I know Doc disagrees with me on this, but I'll just say it. You know, if it weren't for its neighbor, Mexico would look a lot more like Afghanistan than it does today. If it doesn't already, yeah, the drug wars.
Yeah,
they have a tendency to a lot of extremely heretic views.
Yeah,
like the quote unquote saint death. Isn't that the
Santa Muerte?
Dia de los Muertos.
Now, obviously, I would disagree with that.
The Day of the Dead is actually fine. But
I would have to say Santa de Muerte sounds really metal.
Well, it is a metal band, but that's beside the point.
Okay. I mean, isn't there a problem where some of them end up actually do worship the Virgin Mary as a goddess?
Well, that's
yeah.
Sometimes, yeah, but that's sort of less disturbing than the saint of death thing. I mean, it's.
I'm going to skip forward on the unpopular.
Yeah, we're kind of getting off track.
I will say this: this is an unpopular opinion that's bound to be controversial. Well, I'll do this one first, and then I'll do the one on anime.
Yes.
Okay. So, Neo-romanticism is more degenerate than postmodernism. I kind of like postmodernism. Yeah, and I think postmodernism is in a lot of ways better. I know. Well, I guess discuss. To me, postmodernism gets a bad rap from traditionalists because they don't see that whatever they build that will replace modernism has to be built on postmodernism. And not some kind of neo-romantic.
In a way, so you're saying that the problem with neo-romanticism is that it's either not building on any of the objective good of postmodernism, or it's sort of rebounding way too far as a reaction to it. So it's if it's like postmodernism is about relativism and like not aesthetics, neo-romanticism is like everything has to be so perfectly aesthetic that it no longer resembles reality.
Well, neo-romanticism has the fundamental problem that all neo-artistic movements have, and that is that it tries to go back into the past and pretend that the future never happened, right, or the present never happened, which is never going to work, right? It's fundamentally dishonest, and the thing is that because of that, you can't really think of a lot of neo-romantic artists that are really very good. And it also ignores the manifest problems that Romanticism had, and how and why modernism came about to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I mean, postmodernism is sort of characterized by this idea that everything is culturally relative, but to my mind, that in some sense, that's sort of like, that's almost like shooting the moon back to traditionalism, if you think about it. There's an opportunity there to build something radically different and radically anti-progressive inside the seed of post-modernity. And I find when you go to modern museums, the postmodern stuff isn't necessarily all that bad, right? Sometimes it's the stuff that's really bad in modern museums are like the found art and the art that that tries to be like a slice of modern life, which I guess you could argue is postmodern, but I would say the things that are more promising are sort of like the revisualizations of ancient cultures in the modern world that can be postmodern as well.
I mean, in a way, it's like if what you're saying is for a better new artistic movement, it would have to take the claims or have to take the ideas of postmodernism seriously and then almost sort of have an answer to it, as opposed to just saying, like, with the sort of neo-romantic fantasy landscapes and whatnot of pretending that the entire modern world doesn't exist.
Yeah, and that's the problem, right? Because like neo-romanticism just is not going to cut it in today's world. I mean, like, you know, show me how neo-romanticism is like an honest portrayal of the life we live in the 21st century.
And I think that's the nail on the head there, is that it's fundamentally not doing that. It's doing the opposite. It's trying to portray a life that is nothing like the one we live in, because people don't want to live in the life we live in now. And so they're not confronting it honestly.
Okay, so since we established that, one of my other unpopular opinions is that there are only 4 anime plot lines that are unique, and like only 2 aesthetics that are unique in anime, and everything else is just an endless rehash of those aesthetics and messages.
So, you name one of them though?
Well, I mean, one of them is neo-romanticism. I mean, not to kind of like.
So one specific type of anime is trash. Only 3 more to go.
Well, I mean, then there is like, I mean, so. Yeah, I mean, so there's sort of the difficulties with anime. I'd say that one of them is that one kind of archetype of anime that I used to like was like the neo-romantic anime, which is like, let's take something that looks like 19th century European culture or maybe some earlier European culture, populate it with characters that are incredibly attractive and have these flaws that are not really flaws or make them dark and brooding, and set them up with this esoteric plot line that it evokes all of these imagery but never actually deals with any of the ideas, and then they resolve something. Another anime is just like a bunch of cutesy situations that people get into, or so just like things, things like harem animes, and then there's like your panoply of like violence and explosion based animes that are just trying to push the envelope on that.
What's the 4th?
Wait,
well,
I don't know. Okay. I think 3 main archetypes.
You list them all. I mean, I think there's, again, in the way, like, as somebody that is eventually going to make a video on this very subject, yeah, I think anime has a huge amount of problems with it. I don't think, and I would in large part agree with you. I think that, you know, the case to be made is there's something there to work with. It's just trying to figure out how and what to do with it, in the sense that there's a lot of anime that I think have I think it's because it's fundamentally the problem is Japan is not a bastion of traditionalism in a very strong real sense. Japan is suffering from almost every other issue that countries and suffering from modernity are.
Japan is basically a nation crippled by modernity.
This is the problem, though, because this is sort of gets back to why Neo-romanticism can't work, right?
Especially again when Japan, if Japan itself doesn't really understand a lot of the culture it's trying to portray.
Yeah, I mean, or doesn't even want to, right? Because that destroys the romantic. That might destroy the romantic dimension.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think just to go beyond my my favorite line, which is that all anime is trash. Obviously, the art form does have a potential to be better, but
unless you apparently believe it's inherently pornographic, like
again, I'm not going to go through this again, but just literally, it does have a lot of problems that make it its current form, I think, essentially trash.
Honestly, I think a lot of anime fans would agree with you strongly there.
Well, I wonder, why do you consider yourself, if this is such a problematic genre, what I guess are you looking for
Well, it's because I find there's a number of them that I do quite enjoy that I feel don't suffer from these problems, and in a way, there's something that seems a little more. I don't know if I can call it sincere, but something that I find a little more drawn to. Haha, the pun, but then a lot of just sort of modern stuff. I understand the problem, and I sort of understand where you're going to get to, where the problem with a lot of Western animation, of course, people think of, well, either complete storyless cartoons or Family Guy, which is thoroughly, nauseating. And I think it's always been, I think, the issue of, could a Western animator or can Western studios create something that has the appeal to a broad age demographic? And
I'll list the animated thing that I like the most that's currently in production would be Adventure Time, right?
Yeah.
Which is
Avatar, the Last Airbender.
That one came
There's some Pixar movies as well that have a lot of substance to them.
What?
Oh yeah.
Pixar films.
They've been kind of dropping off recently, though, haven't they?
Yeah, but
yeah. Like I was
Cars 3. Oh god.
No, I was really pumped for the dinosaur Western thing, and it was so bad.
Dinosaur Western?
Yeah, it was a while ago. I forgot what it was called, but it had what's his name? Oh, it's escaping me now. Mustache from
Johnny Depp. Was it about the lizard?
No,
that was Rango.
No, it wasn't the lizard. It wasn't the lizard. It was about dinosaurs set in the American West.
How could you go wrong with that?
Yeah. Well, it just flopped because it was a terrible story. But I mean,
I think people are thinking
it was
more
really well animated, but that was again not the problem.
I mean that's why, hopefully when I get my new PC, so I can actually record it, the whole Nier Automata thing. I know I've whinged on about that almost endlessly, but
you've been talking about this for a year, man. You should just use other people's footage.
Oh, maybe I will. But it's I feel like that's one of the few things that I was floored by the fact that it didn't devolve into traditional anime plotline, and we're just gonna have hey, a boss is named after a philosopher. No, it actually does genuinely delve into these ideas in a very, very... I would almost say, I'm going to gush over this, and this is going to be very cringeworthy, but it probably... I think it pokes the holes of being almost high art. I think it almost breaches that.
The big problem is that it being a video game, it's almost impossible to share in a forum that anyone like me would ever consume it.
I think we've covered this topic.
Sure. Yeah.
Catholic Wench, do you have anything to add, or
nope?
No, you didn't. I feel like we're boring you, but you're just here to look pretty.
Yeah, I'm doing a pretty bad job.
That was my job.
Well, you know, Fritz, nobody can see your face, so.
Yeah.
What are you talking about?
Let's see. We have some super chats. Maybe I should answer those. Will the schism between the Catholic Church and the Orthodox ever end, in your opinion?
Nope.
No.
In my opinion, it's not going to happen in our lifetimes, and making predictions beyond that is probably not very reliable. But thank you, Leo the Great. I wish it
well,
would.
I do have a prediction.
Go ahead.
I think if the Orthodox churches are going to unite with the Roman Catholic Church, it's going to be one by one.
Yeah, it'll be national church at a time.
It'll be like siphoning off in a way, in like forming the different Eastern Rite churches.
Yeah,
Same thing.
if we're gonna dive into this, the way I think it's gonna happen is this. It's not gonna be an all at once thing. Like the schism isn't gonna be not mended one day and then mended the other. What's gonna happen is over a period of maybe centuries, churches will fall off the Eastern Church and join the Catholic Church. And at some point, there'll be just the Russian Orthodox Church left, and they may one day decide then, and only at that point maybe people finally realize what's going on.
I mean, I was thinking, I'm wondering if you could do a similar thing with the Protestants, like if there could be created more things like the Anglican Ordinariate.
Well,
to be quite honest, that the big problem right now is that these churches are having large enough doctrinal fights over issues of modernity and sexuality, such that they're not unified enough amongst themselves and their own church bodies to make any kind of doctrinal negotiation that would be required for a unification like we're talking about right now.
And you make a Lutheran rite, and you'll get maybe like 2 Lutherans, and the rest will say this is nothing like Lutheranism.
Mm-hmm. I mean, and that's the problem, is that you can only go so far, because the two Protestant branches that would be closest to Catholicism, Lutheranism and Anglicanism, have these problems. And of course the most unified, I suppose you could argue, Protestant branch that is still fairly doctrinally sound on moral issues is the Southern Baptists, and they're about the furthest you can get theologically from the Catholic Church.
So Avant Tom says, for $5, thank you very much, said, what are your thoughts on Martial Duchamp? Anyone want to take this?
I don't know who that is.
Me neither.
Our
thoughts on him are, who is he?
He's a artist. He's the guy who did the toilet in the early 20th century.
That guy.
He did. I think he's done a number of other pictures that are kind of like jumbled constructions and out of place objects. I mean, of the was he one of the first postmodernists? I think he was, right?
Yep, he was.
Okay,
I've got some sludge. I've got some sludge in my sink.
Was,
I was gonna submit that sludge in my sink to the postmodern, the Museum of Modern Art.
We could all be millionaires at this point.
Yeah.
Pardon me?
Nothing.
I didn't hear either what you said.
It was a joke. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I don't know. I've seen postmodernist art that I've liked. I don't know if these people like Duchamp and even Picasso. I find he gets kind of a little bit pretentious at times.
I think this whole thing started a really unfortunate movement in art and both in music. Like when I was studying music composition, my professors were all about dissecting and disintegrating music to its most basic form to try to understand what is music. So it no longer became art or expressive. It really became sort of auditory experiments, right? And I think that really broke down art as something beautiful because of their need to really take it apart. And I think that's when it really started, was like the 1910s and 1920s.
Yeah. So in my opinion, what makes good art is that you not only have the familiar, but you have a novel twist on it. So for example, you could go take like an ancient Egyptian pillar And the reason why it's interesting is because it looks like a plant reed that's made out of stone. So it's something that's familiar, but you put a twist on it. And that's kind of the most, that's how we view art. This is what we view art as beautiful. And the problem now is that we don't have anything to relate to. We don't have anything familiar. We don't have anything that we can really grab a hold of to really look in a new way, or to look in an interesting way, or to look in a beautiful way, which is why art doesn't really resonate with us anymore.
And almost in a way because we don't know what beautiful is anymore, because we believe the idea that, you know, beauty is subjective. Sorry, go ahead.
Me? Oh, I was going to agree that in order for something to sort of progress but still be accessible to people, is that you need a bit of the old, which is familiar to people, mixed in with a bit of the new, which sort of takes a familiarity and challenges it one level above. But that's already mentioned. So now I guess we're talking about we don't know what beauty is anymore. So what is it?
Well, I like where Intermezzo was going. The fact that I think what you're saying, Intermezzo, is that we don't have the primal experiences that might fuel a genuinely new artistic movement.
Exactly. I think that we need to go back kind of to like adopt, like for art specifically, I think that we need to go adopt natural principles and kind of put like an interesting twist on that using the resources that we have available. For both art, for architecture, and the like. I feel like that's the way moving forward.
On that subject, I'm sort of wanting to ask this. What do people here think about Vaporwave?
I don't really understand why people like it so much.
Well, can you explain Vaporwave to us, Blackjack? Like, I understand Vaporwave as a genre of music that people, like, I listen to it in the background. I don't understand Vaporwave as anything other than background noise, or as like an artistic mode in it of itself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, it is mostly background noise. I'll concede that, but sort of just even as an art form, I find it kind of interesting because it's a lot of the stuff I've seen is very heavily focused on a visual as well as an auditory experience.
Yeah, I mean, well, this is sort of like the lo-fi beach sort of deal, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, yeah, I like it. I don't, you know, it's great background music. I just don't understand it as like an artistic form where I like buy like an album of Vaporwave. I have a hard time imagining doing it. Or even playing Vaporwave. This is always like I'm of the music that I'm really familiar with, like or consume, it'd be like classical music or rock or bluegrass, which I play and listen to. Like I know artists, I go to their concerts every now and again. I used to buy CDs when CDs were still a thing, you know. But this online music, it's just it's this online medium that I have no idea how to react to, right? Everything just seems sort of
the reason I ask is because I've met some people who make this stuff, and I mean they seem to think of it as a serious art form. So
I like to talk to them and ask them about it, right?
I'll see if I can't get them. I mean, again, I don't know if I'll be able to, but would you want to interview them?
No, I would like to interview people. I'm interested in culture more than anything else. And if there's new forms of art coming online in the digital world, I am very interested in it. It's just it's so radically different than what I'm used to from recording artists.
Yeah. So I mean, I'll see if I can. I'll see what I can get done on that account.
Okay, so Leo the Great for $2 asks, is it a moral sin to get drunk? I think it's a venial sin.
I think it's the way I've heard it. It's more. It's not so much getting drunk itself. It's the fact that you're much more, you know, uninhibited to commit mortal sins.
You need pious to answer that question. I think that's
sin. Yeah. Well, thank you for the super chat, Leo. I don't know if anyone here has the competence to answer that.
I do know it's at least a venial sin.
Yeah, I'd say it. I'm sure it's a sin of some sort to get.
Yeah, it's mortal sin. You have to have grave matter, full knowledge, and full consent. So, I mean, I guess that's a little vague to say whether the drunkenness, like a one-time thing in and of itself, is grave. But I'm not a priest, so.
And it also depends on like which level. Like, are you tipsy or are you blackout drunk?
Catholic wench.
I think it is a matter of culpability. Some people just drink with friends. They find out that they're drunk later. I think when it becomes a habit, a self-destructive habit, then I think that's when it sort of goes from venial to mortal.
Okay. LM asks, should child support exist if abortion is legal? I think the answer is yes. Catholic wench?
Yes, of course. But kill your baby so we don't have to pay for it? Yeah, that's conducive to a functioning society, isn't it?
It seems that if we were to get rid of child support, and we're probably the wrong people to ask. If you were going to ask an atheist MRA, they might say something different. But to the point where abortion is legal and we don't have child support, we are essentially paying women to abort their children, in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
And that's pretty terrible. So the question itself is sort of so morally inverted that it's hard. I understand what you're saying, right? They're saying, well, if women can veto their own parenthood, then why can't men? Well, yeah, I guess that's sort of an injustice, but that's not the main injustice.
If only there's a way.
The main injustice is that we're murdering children. Yeah. And if we do what we're implying here, we're just subsidizing that process.
Why can't men have a say in whether or not we kill the baby? That's the real issue. Sorry,
I thought you were going to say the more reasonable thing is why can't men decide whether or not the person that they're having sex with gets pregnant? Why can't they choose whether or not to have sex? Oh wait, they can.
Yeah,
wait, I thought all sex was rape though.
I don't think we're quite there yet.
How many levels of irony are we on now?
Maybe this is one of the reasons why progressive interactions are kind of so futile, is that it doesn't put it together itself.
Next super chat?
Yeah, I've got a bunch of them here. There's a lot of super chats.
I thought this was supposed to be an unpopular opinion stream.
Well, yeah, but then everyone started agreeing with them, so and
everyone started giving money to you.
Yeah.
I mean,
should I start a Catholic version of the Romanian Iron Guard? Well, you can if you want to. I'm not stopping you. But the difficulty is that, as I said before, for reactionaries and right wingers, if you're playing out of the 1930s playbook, you're not thinking in a number of dimensions. You're not thinking. The first most obvious dimension is the fact that those 1930s reactionary movements ultimately failed. The second thing you're not thinking is that our society looks radically different than the 1930s. So maybe you could be inspired by the Romanian Iron Guard or something like that, but then you'd have to explain to me how you could make something like that in post-modernity. And I feel like so much of reactionary thought, it's hobbled by history. It's literally hobbled by history. We're every single thought we have is just like, let's just go back to a time that looks nothing like our modern age, copy that, tell everyone that they could have that again, and then go to lunch and go like, oh, well, too bad you guys are too lazy to not live like we did in the 19th century. But I think that's sort of bullshit. I think what you need to have a new way of looking at reality that takes the principles of the past, but actually talks about them, like not in some LARPy, super romanticized version of a West that hasn't existed for 80 years, but in the actual reality we are right now. And I know I'm not the most positive person. I know I don't relate positively to my exterior environment, and I probably should deal with that on a level other than just doing YouTube videos. But at the end of the day, I mean, we need to deal with postmodernity. We do not need to deal with wasn't this idea from 90 to 200 years ago so much better than we have it now? And whatever we can do to make that thinking better is a good idea.
Yeah, just to make that paragraph a sentence, we should learn lessons from history, not copy paste it.
Yeah, we shouldn't be trying to turn the clock back. We should be telling modernity that the clock doesn't exist.
No, well, that's
I mean that's a bit separate, but yeah.
Well, the idea is you can tell them the clock doesn't exist, but what you need to be is you don't need to tell them that the clock doesn't exist. You need to be the next new thing. Reactionaries need to be the new thing. That will demonstrate that the clock doesn't exist.
Reactionaries need to be the new thing.
Everyone will see that the clock does not exist.
Maybe then saying reactionary is not a good term.
Well, I don't care. You can call it whatever you want to. You know what I'm talking about, right?
I actually really like
the rejection of the
sentence,
modern.
I'm going to use that more often. That's a great sentence. Thank you, Dave.
Use what?
Reactionaries need to be the new thing.
I mean, again, it's like what you said a couple days ago, that if the dissident right could start up a competent anti-war movement for the whole Syria thing, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, that would be amazing.
I mean, what's the left going to do?
Anti-war movement is almost impossible without any sort of institutional support.
Well, I mean, anti-intervention. I mean, these things. This is why people will need to start making. I know it's almost impossible to make alliances with progressives at this stage, but this is what eventually is going to happen: is people are going to build up an anti-intervention movement. And
I think you sort of have, if you're gonna go first off, I wouldn't call it anti-war, but if you're gonna go that sort of route, anti-intervention, which I think does need to happen, at least for any sort of reasonable foreign policy to be enacted in this country ever again. Yeah. I think the way to go about it would be just to make sure that people understand that, pointlessly throwing tomahawks at a country with no end goal is not a good use of blood, treasure, or whatever exactly is being spent. We've gotten absolutely nothing out of Iraq or Afghanistan. We've gotten nothing out of throwing tomahawks at Syria, however many times we've done that. We've gotten nothing out of Libya, but a destabilized country near to
and hundreds of thousands of migrants from Africa going to Europe.
Totally destabilize Western Europe. I'm going to move on. What are your opinions of SSPX?
My opinion is that they prefer form over. They prefer just kind of like the look of it, as opposed to the true spirituality, in my opinion.
I mean, it makes it hard to oppose them for that reason in the Francis era, I find.
Well, yeah, but it doesn't seem like it. It doesn't seem very. It seems almost Donatist to me, and they're just so obsessed about They're so obsessed about doctrinal purity that they forget the whole essence of the faith. Which is not to say, like, I prefer doctrinal purity as well, but you need to make sure that it's not just like one look for everything. You can kind of have a different look to it, and it's still just as valid.
To paraphrase Solzhenitsyn, you shouldn't be so legalistic about it.
Yes, exactly.
Well, I agree with that. I do. I mean, SSPX has problems. I'm not going to deny that. It's just the current age kind of leaves you in a weird place. Pardon me. LM for $2 says, "Oh, so let's pay women to have bastards." I think this is in reaction to the abortion thing with child support.
Better a bastard than dead.
I mean,
it's hardly being a bastard these days would hardly be grounds for being a social pariah right now. There's a gazillion safety nets for single mothers. And ultimately, women are fucking crazy these days. They want to have sex with guys when they don't want that guy to be the father of their children. Going against, I don't know how many millennia of evolutionary biology and beyond. You don't fuck a guy unless he has resources. I mean, and they just want to do what they want when they want because the culture tells them to. And they wonder why they're having all these negative ramifications. Yeah, you can choose what you do, but you cannot choose the consequences. And fine. Never mind, I'm going to stop.
Catholic Wench, I think you just became a MGTOW meme when you said you shouldn't fuck a guy without resources.
Yeah.
No,
you're never going to live that down, and that's
Sorry, I couldn't resist. That was correct, though. The problem with this whole line of questioning is just we're so down a rabbit hole morally that if you follow this logic, it's just like, well, what Elam is essentially urging is that as opposed to trying to climb out of the rabbit hole, we should just keep on digging. But no, I don't want to keep on digging. I don't want to constantly go like, oh, well, he violated the principle, so why don't we let another person violate the principle? The only result of that logic is the SJW and the end of our civilization and the end of all moral regulation.
I mean, it's the same principle of, the progressive saying, well, if it's okay for, men, if men have a lot of sex with a lot of women, they're called studs, women are called sluts, Of course, the answer is not, well, let's just let women have sex with as many men as they want and without ramifications. No, it's to enforce moral purity, enforce chastity on both sexes.
Catholic lunch, you have no reason to be embarrassed. That was super cute.
That wasn't cute. I'm not marrying you for resources, by the way.
It was cute. It sounded like this question was like a MGTOW line of questioning, and you just threw like a big piece of red meat out like in quote form. So I couldn't help but catch that. But Fritz is right. Like the problem is that we're in this mode where it's easier to dig down to make things equal than it is to build up, which is one reason why equality and these consistency principles are just going nowhere in a very short order.
And I mean, it all just sort of boils down to the fact that it's just we're starting off with bad premises in the sense of how do we deal with a sexual culture that's already so far gone? Well, no, you start with a lot different, I mean, from the traditionalist point of view, it's you don't start with how do we make things better within a society that's already accepted the sexual revolution. It's how do we combat the sexual revolution itself. That's
we're not going to combat the sexual revolution. I mean, we just can't on the larger framework of society, and this is also a thing. We just have to stop owning the mainstream culture if you're anti-progressive. And there's just no way that some kind of sane, rational culture is going to come about from where we are currently. And we can't be the ones who are like, oh, let's take control over a culture that we don't really have a lot of influence over and then take ownership over all the things that went bad. That's the 80s and 90s style conservatism, and it leads nowhere. The only way this is going to get corrected is to literally it's going to be to create alternative parallel institutions, or there's going to be some force that comes in. Are people talking about inviting Zimmy or other people? Do you have a link you could just invite her? I don't know if I have.
I'll do that.
Oh, I didn't know that Zimmy wanted to go on.
Well,
I didn't think she was on. Well, if just send her an invite if she's interested. Okay. Well, I have more super chats though. How to foster Catholic identity past the family? This is actually a good question. This is from Ethan Goldstein. Because I think that this is another problem here too, is that in many ways we don't have a Catholic identity that exists for a lot of single people. Mm-hmm. And that's another distinct problem of modernity.
Mm-hmm.
Yet another in a list.
I do like it. That was actually one thing I was talking about Blackjack with earlier. Need young adults, and I honestly think, I think like dating too is something that young Catholics need help with, and that's something that maybe like
it's something young people in general need help with these days.
Yes, and so like I think that if the Catholic Church was good at helping, basically like guiding young people not only through their careers but also through like early relationships and stuff like that, and guide them towards marriage, I think that would be very, very helpful.
It's in really bad shape right now. I can think of so many girls, really, really attractive girls who are Catholic, late 20s, no want for male attention, but no guys want to commit. Not even Catholic men want to commit. Right now, it's terrible.
I mean, it's almost like there needs to be Catholic youth group, but extended towards college in your 20s.
Yeah, I find it interesting because, from my perspective, it always seems like, hey, I know like a lot of guys, including myself, who cannot find Catholic women. So.
And I find that amazing, but I'm not going to go into biographic details. But something is wrong with this whole process, and it's somehow really not set up very well. But I think perhaps what he was saying was there doesn't seem to be much of a Catholic culture outside of like for people who might never find a mate, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe I'm misunderstanding the super chatter.
I think we've all missed whatever his question was, but we're
maybe I'll just move on. It was a good conversation, and I definitely think that's a difficulty. LM for $2 says, "Let's just have the bastards and not penalize them." This just seems like a different form of the same question. LM, I'm sorry, we don't control what Mencius Bulbug would call the cathedral. We don't set the standards for who gets punished culturally. And nor can we make any promises about. Maybe this is the thing too, right? Like, it's like what Catholic Wench was saying, right? It's not fair for women because women are in an environment where most relationships with reasonably confident and competent men require them to have extramarital sex. And then we're like, okay, well, in order to be up and up on this, you have to essentially take all of the risk for this externality. And we've essentially created a sexual environment that's unfair to women. Now, of course, you could argue like, well, it's unfair to men too, but this is sort of the more of the cascading race at the bottom type thinking, right? But women, in order for these norms to make sense to begin with, there needed to be a way that you could play by the rules and get married to a reasonable person who is eligible to you at a young age. Without that kind of system and that kind of reasonable assurance, obviously there's no guarantees, it's very difficult to run a culture that addresses these issues on a macrocosmic level.
I think in one way that could be something that could be very useful in building a counter alternative culture and institutions is, if there's sort of this implied idea that if you are going to, that if you're a young man or a young woman that wants to get in a long-term relationship, but you can't find it in our modern world, if there is the sort of alternative underground institution where, hey, they're actually promoting this and there are a lot of people that share our views, maybe that might help attract more people towards reactionary communities.
Yeah, well, I mean, to sort of go back to a question we had before, when I asked, should I form something like the Iron Guard, but in America? I'm not going to recommend forming a violent right-wing organization, but I'm, the idea that one thing I think that those groups did right was that they organized themselves, and certainly organizing yourselves in those kind of communities is not, it can't be a bad thing as long as you understand why you're organized in the first place.
And if you know how to operate within the framework you're in and you're not pretending like it is 70 years ago.
Yeah. But you're not pretending it's 70 years ago and you're in Romania.
The other big difficulty is that we have a lot of, women want to marry men who are more able to earn money than they are. And we have an economy that prices a lot of men out of the marriage market.
Yeah, that's just not how the structure of the economy works right now.
And we're obsessed with this ridiculous idea of gender symmetry that needs to pertain, and it's nuts. But again, all the believers do this. Also, all the leaders believe this, right? Mark Zuckerberg and Barack Obama and all the Supreme Court justices, and us shouting against this trend isn't going to do anything, right? The best we could ever hope for is to create a counterculture inside the main culture and then operate on that. Mm-hmm. So we are done with the super chats. Anyone want to talk about anything before we? I mean, I could do more unpopular opinions. I think people I might say some of these unpopular opinions for a more diverse audience that's more, more feisty and disagreeing. Otherwise, it's just like, oh yeah, we all agree on that. We all agree on this.
Oh well, let's pick the most contentious one you think you got. Let's see what happens.
Maybe I could do that.
The edgiest one.
Yep.
Edgiest one. I need to find my place, guys. Catholics don't sing; they quack. Catholic lunch.
Some gobbled.
Quack, quack, gobble, gobble.
That's not really contentious. That's sort of a statement of fact.
Cajun food is the best native cuisine to originate from the continental United States.
I'm not going to disagree with that at all. So.
I like barbecue. Barbecue's good.
Yeah.
The reason I can't speak at all here because the signature dish from where I come from is literally called a garbage plate.
Oh, I don't know what that is.
And it's basically, oh yeah, you also live in upstate New York, yeah. It's basically just piling on as much like greasy food as you can onto a plate.
Yeah,
it looks like vomit. It looks like vomit, honestly.
It is delicious though.
Well, hold on, I'm gonna go a little Cajun here. Yeah, you got the etouffee with the boudin, and then you get the cornbread and the good Cajun food. The fried alligator, very good.
Yeah, hey, Cajun has it all. I mean, Texas barbecue is good. I'm not going to say it isn't. The alt-right could massively improve its messaging and image optics by dressing in skeleton costumes and ambushing scrawny young Italian kids at night to explain to them the importance of haplogroups and psychometric testing.
What?
Yeah.
It's a reference to the Karate Kid,
I think what they need to do is they need to swap the tiki torches for flashlights.
Yeah. Steven Universe is the SJW equivalent of the Pureflix film. I'm still not convinced that the show isn't an experiment to see how much crap progressives will tolerate from a show that ideologically flatters them.
It's also I tried to watch a few episodes and then I had to stop because it was so boring. It's just like anytime I think about it, I just think about like it's a spew of like 1970s psychedelic colors.
Not to mention that it's just the ultimate SJW vision of the world with a character that is so emasculated and irritating you can't stand him. There isn't a single young boy, at least of my generation, that would find Steven Universe an admirable hero.
I hope when I have kids, I will not. If I have boys, I'm never letting them watch Steven Universe because that's the last person I want as a male role model.
I don't think it'll be.
I don't think they'll be following. Yeah. I don't think they'll be following over to force you to watch it. Okay, so going on, I think very weird.
Actually, I could. Are you still talking about Steven Universe or?
Well, go ahead if you.
No, I actually had to say is I know this is going to sound weird, but like the Voltron reboot is actually portrays a relatively healthy version of masculinity, considering most of the main characters are males, and they're not. I mean, there's sort of stereotypes in some ways. Like there's like the big guy that likes to eat, and then there's like the loner. But it's like they're actually treated like real people, and they're not like. And it's not like taking a dump on traditional masculinity of. We need to work together to accomplish this goal and do something greater.
I'm gonna call this the Fritz defense of anime by saying anime is good because it's marginally better than the shit animation we have in the West.
Okay,
which to my mind is not. I mean, I appreciate it. It's probably even true, but to my mind, it's not actually a defense of the thing. It's just a horrible indication of where we are as a culture overall.
It's a reason to smash televisions.
Okay, how about this? Pearl Jam is better than Nirvana. Catholic one, you're a 90s kid like me.
Does she realize she's muted?
She's muted.
Oh.
Unmute thyself.
Okay. So when just unmuted yourself? No, I think Nirvana's a lot better than Pearl Jam.
Oh, come on, have you heard 10? That album rocks.
Have you ever seen? I think I've asked this before, but Distributors, have you seen the music video for "Do the Evolution" by Pearl Jam?
I love that video.
That video is pretty good, but that's not the album. To my mind, by the time they did Do the Evolution, Pearl Jam was already in decline. Pearl Jam made one awesome album called 10. And I think I understand why people like Nirvana more, because I think they were more consistent over their 3 albums than Pearl Jam was. But to my mind, 10 is like the perfect rock album, right? Including in a way that doesn't take itself too seriously. And I think that's, anyway.
I think Nirvana is slightly better, just because I prefer their consistency.
Mm-hmm.
But they're both pretty meh as far as music goes.
Okay, I'll just keep on going. Neuromancer is the best science fiction in the last 70 years.
I don't have an opinion on that.
I don't know. That's no one does. Classical music would be more popular if people could divorce it from the image of pantalooned wig fops prancing around to the tunes of a harpsichord.
That is true.
Yeah,
No. It's not the powdered wigged fops dancing around. It's the pretentious old puckered tight asshole people who go to the opera. That's why I avoid that. At least that's why I avoid the classical musical community, because I just hate the people.
Is that
because a lot of people they really like film music, and a lot of film music is very similar to, say, like Wagner or like late Romanticism. So which is certainly art music.
It's all orchestral.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So does anybody have opinions on Philip Glass?
I like Philip Glass a lot. I like to play on piano.
Yeah.
All that is to say that we are white people in the 21st century.
This is true.
Yeah. Whenever I go to see a concert, it's always either like an old stuffy person or a young kind of hipster person.
Mm-hmm.
I like classical music before it was cool. That's not possible. That's actually not possible.
No, I was made fun of for liking classical music in middle school.
Yeah.
Okay,
Actually,
how about
the
this
same
one?
way.
This is a Catholic wedge one. Sorry, we're going with classical music?
I'm done.
Okay. Anne of Green Gables will be remembered as the greatest work of Canadian literature of all time.
Anything after that is Canadian shiterature, so I might have to agree with you.
Are you a Anne of Green Gables fan, Catholic wench?
Nope, never read the book, never watched the TV series.
No, really?
Yeah, I'm from the East Coast too, so yeah.
Oh my God, a Nova Scotian that has not read Anne of Green Gables. Yeah. I wonder what Tay would
say. Too far away.
She'd probably say, "I don't understand why all these degenerates are not reading the books right," or something like that.
She is okay.
You tried, Fritz.
Catholic assures me that there are people from Cape Breton don't have this sort of
Irish accent.
But I swear it's a thing, and I know I have no standing to assert that against a Nova Scotian, but it's true. Okay, well, since no one apparently has read Anne of Green Gables, that goes uncontested. Oh, how about this? The lack of forgiveness in the progressive movement will be its ultimate undoing.
That's anyone's undoing.
What? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I gotta say,
this is one of the big things that's going to sink them.
Well, but it's the one thing keeping it together.
That too.
Fear does keep the systems in line. That is true.
Well, it's also just because you have like a boogeyman. So like right now, like what's keeping them together is the fact that they can like ally against this, mysterious white male, like poorly educated white male out there. And so because of this, because it rejects, because it's not inclusive, that's actually what keeps it together for right now. As soon as it becomes actually inclusive, the whole thing's going to collapse.
If it becomes actually inclusive.
I mean, if you could extend the Star Wars metaphor that Distributus was using, it's almost in a way that they're over reliant. It's like they're over relying on the Death Star to fight all their battles for them, because the fact that they will not forgive somebody for turning their back on them.
Well, the second the progressive movement forgives you for being a racist ceases to become scary.
Yeah.
Can we talk about how ridiculous the idea of the Death Star is?
No.
I think Star Wars sucks, but I mean, it does seem like we have a Death Star, and that Death Star is called a very big nuke, which I'm sure you could use to blow up a planet. But, okay, are we done with that? I think that's Mopier. Yeah. How about this? Debates over the Filioque largely remind me of the debates I had in college over whether Dave Matthews Band was good.
I don't know. I think Filioque is slightly more interesting than that one.
I just have zero interest in this theological disagreement. And I've got a super chat that says, would you guys formally debate a Protestant? And this sort of fits into this. Like, I think that I'd love to have these debates, but I don't want this channel to descend into a theological knife fight between various Christian denominations.
You don't want it to become the Christian version of Andy Worski.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
we do not want
Christian versus
theological blood sports. Theological blood.
We had those hundreds of years ago. It didn't end well.
Yeah, there was
Scholastic.
actual blood.
Scholastic Kumite.
We'll rename it to the 30 Years Comite, and then
Yeah.
Bring in Todd Lewis.
Oh yeah.
Theological blood sports.
looks like we've got a musical super chat for $10. Simple Sandman, thank you very much. Now this is an unpopular opinion. Linkin Park's first 3 albums were incredibly influential and very creative for their time. As a single father raising my son, I found a great deal of solace in those albums. Interesting. As a person who is more biased towards alternative rock, I always kind of look down on Linkin Park, but maybe I should give it another look. I mean, aside from time, I don't know if I ever really listened or owned one of their songs, so I'm not a person who can really comment on this.
I think I'll confess I used to like them, but
I'm hearing a lightsaber sound.
I think it's just ambient noise from somebody's computer or whatever.
That might be my fan because it's going.
Yeah, that fixes it.
I'm going to have to eat this. With the development of LCGs, it amazes me that people still play Magic the Gathering. Well, apparently not, because, never mind. We've discussed.
Go on.
Okay, I dislike collectible games.
About last weekend.
Yeah, I dislike that. I'm going to go straight on. Okay, blah, 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 blah.
Aw.
We've already had this debate over Magic the Gathering, and there's nobody to...
I guess maybe I was just trying to expose you. Something you did last
I'm a
week.
board game
Something
nerd.
you,
Everyone already knows that I'm a board game
No,
nerd.
something you were successful at last week.
Okay, well, yes, I'm still good at Magic the Gathering, regardless of the fact that I think it's ridiculous that there are board games that you can collect. Settlers Catan is a board game only for noobs. That's not even unpopular. Not voting for an entire year can be the most politically empowering thing you ever do.
I'm certainly not going to do it anymore.
How about for 7 years?
Yeah, I think that. Do you guys know the guy who got sacked from the Atlantic?
No.
Kevin Williamson. He's this like normie conservative who's really anti-alt-right.
Why was he writing for the Atlantic?
Well, they were like, we need to increase our ideological diversity, so let's hire this normie conservative.
He was an ideological diversity hire.
Yeah, they started hyperventilating into brown paper bags when they caught the fact that he was pro-life. And then they decided to sack him in short order because they couldn't stand up to the progressive lynch mob. But I had sort of a simple revelation listening to Kevin Williamson's podcast when I was an Army conservative. And I was kind of defecting at that point already. But on this podcast, Mad Dogs and Englishmen, they just unleashed like this cavalcade of like normie conservative stuff. And then eventually it came out that Kevin Williamson didn't vote. And I'm like, what? You don't vote? Isn't that a betrayal of normie conservatism? I'm like, well, if Kevin Williamson, who writes about politics for a living, doesn't vote, what does that tell you about the effectiveness of voting? It means that the people who actually have power to shape opinions don't actually take voting seriously. So why should plebs like us take voting seriously? Is our time worth that much less?
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's like you even think about it. It's like what is it? It takes like 20 minutes to get to the place to vote and come back. Is it even worth that much? Even 20 minutes of your time. Could you do something better? Probably.
I might vote in local elections just because they're fairly close where I live. but that's about it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that personally, I think that local elections should be more important than the national ones anyway. I know that they're probably not, but I kind of feel I'm very much a localist. I think that you should be making an impact on your local community, and the national stuff. Yeah, whatever's going to happen is going to happen. I don't think we have too much control over that.
Speaking of voting,
The direct election of senators was the biggest mistake in national history.
This might be an interesting unpopular opinion or something I thought I'd throw around. With the upcoming abortion referendum in Ireland, I actually think the better thing for the pro-life thing to do would be enough abstaining from the vote so it delegitimizes the vote rather than attempt to legitimize even the idea itself. Because the fact is that even if
it's tough to do that in a defensive election.
I suppose I understand that, but I'm thinking like even if the pro-life side wins, it's going to be a loss because it still legitimizes the idea that people have a right to vote on whether or not unborn children deserve to live. That's not something I think anybody should be that people should vote on.
Well, they certainly shouldn't be able to vote on it, but
yeah,
the fact of the matter is that
they are.
In this instance, the existence of the law itself stands in for the opposition. So let's finish up the super chats and call it a night because we're at the 2-hour mark.
Hey, Steve Gniden's in the chat.
Okay, so LM, what is your opinion for $2? Thank you very much. What's your opinion on Elizabeth Bruning and the leftist Catholics? We've talked a lot about these guys. I don't know. Well, is Elizabeth Bruning, is she like left Orthodox or just left like not Orthodox?
Are we talking about the JQ here, the Jesuit question?
I don't know what Elizabeth
might
Bruning
be.
is. Pardon me?
I have this whole thing with Audrey Assad in the sense that I think her music is absolutely wonderful, but I'm very upset about a lot of her own views because I think they're detracting her from her own Catholic faith.
Well, but is Audrey Assad, I guess the question is Audrey Assad, because there's two kinds of leftist Catholics. There are leftist Catholics that are Orthodox, and there's leftist Catholics that are not Orthodox and functionally not Catholic.
She is Orthodox, so.
Okay, well, I guess we'll answer the Orthodox but still leftist variety.
Mm-hmm.
They are definitely still Catholic, and I think with robust debate, I think we could get them over to a more reactionary point of view. But I think that I think they're mainly left because of the current cultural environment, and I would say the other thing that kind of puts them to the left is the boomer obsession with assimilation, as opposed to cultural resistance, which has essentially created the progressive Catholic field.
And it seems like it's only being sort of eroded away by the progressives now staunch anti-Catholicism, like them actually breaking the bright lines on abortion and marriage and religious liberty.
Well, I mean, they broke the bright lines
on
a long
this
time
subject.
ago. What?
I was going to say, sort of on this subject, my grandfather, who's very Catholic, is still. I'm still having a hard time convincing him that the Democratic Party is not the party of Catholics, which is sort of funny to me.
Yeah, I mean, if booing God in the party statement is not an indication at the convention, then what? I mean, what's going to do it? I mean, I don't know.
The problem is he doesn't pay attention to politics.
Well, the question is how much effort do these people require, right? I mean, there's two. If the person is Orthodox and they're leftist, you should be their friend, and you should be their support system, and you should engage them in friendly dialogue. So I think dialogue with those people helps us, because Orthodox principles are naturally traditionalist, and they will eventually be subsumed into that. If they break with the Orthodox, then they're functionally not Catholic, and we should treat them just like a run-of-the-mill progressive, and don't let them claim. I don't think people who aren't trying to live Catholic lives should call themselves Catholic. I think that distinction just needs to be made.
I think I agree with you there.
They'll have views that fall short, and we need to respect that. But
We need to kill the term "raised Catholic."
Yeah,
Well, I mean,
definitely.
that's actually that's an interesting thing I've thought about, of like the different attempts of how to engage with the nominal Catholic populations. Because I fully believe that I one of my unpopular opinions might be that the church militant hardline approach is just as dangerous as the progressive approach for Catholics, in the sense that if we just there was just a starting issuing, excommunication after excommunication, and like vehemently holding to orthodoxy above all else, as much as I think orthodoxy is important, you're going to get, huge amounts of Catholics that could still be convinced to come back to the faith leave. And I think the approach should be more strict than the moderates. So essentially, Robert Barron, but slightly more hardline.
Well, slightly more hardline than Robert Barron would be insanely right wing for a vast majority of Catholics, which is why the sort of, I think what we want is we want a right wing church by today's standards. And the thing what's sort of strange is that, we're kind of trying to describe right wing stuff as if it were moderate, and I think it's just not by the standards that we're dealing with today. But I'm just going to put out the call for any last questions from the chat, and then just keep this going for about 5 more minutes. Does that sound good?
Sure.
Any other news items people think are interesting? We went through a lot of opinions, but we didn't really deal with them a lot.
Did we talk about Chick-fil-A infiltrating New York?
Oh yeah. That's to my favorite Tara McCarthy tweet of all time, when Chick-fil-A, someone said, that Western culture is really broken when people describe Christians selling chicken sandwiches as creepy. And then Tara McCarthy was like, well, actually, I think eating the flesh of chickens at any time is creepy.
Especially when Christians do it.
Well, I don't think she really cared about it. She said Christian or not.
No.
Is she some sort of vegan?
Oh yeah, she's vegan.
Look. Here's my unpopular opinion. If you're gonna act like a cow, you should be treated like a cow.
Or perhaps a sacred Hindu cow. No, sorry, that was not a racial thing against Tara, but
Zibby says hi.
Yeah,
okay, can't come in right.
So she did ask a question too.
What?
So she said that her pastor says that there's no such thing as a conservative and a liberal. There's just faithful and non-faithful. What are her thoughts on it?
Well, that is certainly the distinction I think we should be making, right?
Yeah.
And I think that for people like Simca Fisher and Mark Shea and maybe Elizabeth Bruning, I don't know if he falls into this category or not, if they are attempting to live to the catechism, even if they fail, right? If they are attempting to do that and preaching that people should attempt to do that with their lives, then they are Catholic, and we should embrace them as friends and then work out these political disagreements in discussion with them. It could be a private discussion, it could be a public discussion, but the most important thing is that they are attempting to live the faith.
But we shouldn't treat them as enemies.
Yes.
No, you certainly should not. Never call into question the fact that they're Catholic because they're progressive, and don't treat them like, they're like. Don't let the progressives see error between you and people who are Orthodox progressives. Just don't.
Orthodox.
Just don't. Like, don't put down Audrey Assad in public. Don't put down. I mean, and I guess by stating the strategy, I am sort of doing this in public. But if the progressives get the sense that Orthodox conservatives are bashing Orthodox progressives, they will absolutely exploit that and use that to tear apart the Orthodox community. They would love nothing more. Disagreements over politics are for friendly discussions, publicly or privately, but they will be friendly discussions. Do not let the progressives tear apart the Catholic cathedral.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Well, I don't see. Are there any more questions? I didn't see any.
I think that there were a couple in there, but I think some were just kind of joke questions.
I don't see any that are that serious. At any rate, guys, it was a little bit of a low-key, unpopular opinions, but thanks so much for showing up. And hopefully we'll meet
fun.
again, and we'll do some more live streams, maybe more focused ones. But thanks everyone for showing up. Have a good night.
Mm-hmm.